Hi everybody, this is Anne. As potters, we're always looking for new challenges to sharpen our skill. We're tempted to look for inspiration at what other potters around us are currently doing, but don't forget the amazing work done from great artists from the past. In this video, my inspiration came from the great Japanese Ukiyo-E landscape woodblock print, The Great Wave off Kanagawa. I challenged myself to create a flowing wave bas-relief design on a mug and ended up combining the techniques of applique, sculpture, and carving. I'll show you how I did it. I bet many of you have seen this print, The Great Wave off Kanagawa. It's amazing to me how the artist organized the painting with overlapping waves to create depth. His skillful placement of lines contrasting long swelling curves and the short jagged fingers creates the dynamic that the wave is swallowing up the three boats in the design. As the wave overpowers the scene, it's easy to even miss that there are three boats disappearing into them. For my blank canvas, I started with a thrown porcelain soft leather hard mug. I needed it to be wet enough so my appliques would blend into the surface without cracking off. I started by drawing a soft wave pattern around the entire bottom section of the mug. I like to organize my piece with borders around the top and bottom, so that's the perfect bottom border. I completed the framing with a contrasting straight line border around the top. Working from the center out, instead of a mountain behind the waves, I thought a tall, skinny lighthouse might be a good design choice to draw your eye up to the border from all the drama at the bottom. I didn't want the lighthouse to stick out like a sore thumb, so I framed it with a setting sun behind it, which also added one more layer of depth. On either side of the lighthouse, I wanted those swelling waves to be churning and crashing down. I freehanded flowy wave shapes over the bottom boundary line. I wanted to add depth to my elements, so they would begin to create the different layers and perspectives. I rolled a thin coil and flattened it down along the bottom edge so the top was still a bit thicker. I placed that along the sun shape that I drew. I really pressed the tapered clay down to blend it into the soft clay of the mug so it was flat. Don't worry if the clay overlaps your drawn lines a little bit. The sun is the farthest back layer in my design. It won't have any carved distinguishing details. I just needed to be able to see the silhouette. To clean up my lines, this paddle carving tool has a nice squared off edge and can subtly shave clay away and sharpen details. Remember that the clay is so soft at this stage that I can't expect to get crisp details yet. For the layer on top of the sun, I added more bits of clay to the lighthouse. Remember not to add too much clay as you don't want the piece to be heavy. I'm adding clay but also removing a lot of it as I clean up and flatten my lighthouse down. I pieced the lighthouse on both edges first, then put a strip of thin clay along the center before working to blend them in. As the lighthouse will be my only architectural element, I wanted to make sure the lines were at least straight up and down. I added the top dome and a little beacon light over the tower. Remember that as the piece dries, it'll be easier to add any extra little details to the elements. I knew I wanted the border to be the top layer, so I added more small flattened out coils along that bottom border. I really took my time to work the clay flat to the mug, removing any excess clay when I could to keep the weight down. I still want to maintain the shape of the mug that I threw, so the flatter the better towards the bottom foot. One trick to getting the clay flat and smooth is to wipe a damp sponge over the area, dampen your finger, then burnish the clay flat. Your clay will start to dry out quickly, so to avoid fingerprints or gouging the clay, re-moisten often. Let's also outline our side wave patterns. I started with the same thin coil bits along the lines that I drew and worked them down to the mug. I knew I wanted to create layers of waves, so I played around with adding coils in the center of it to see if it would help me envision how the wave might be swelling and crashing down over top of itself. I used my fingers to start sculpting parts of the clay forward and backwards in space, trying to figure out the dynamics of the design. I wanted some layers to overlap and curl over other parts so they would create an illusion of the breaking sea. To unite the left, middle, and right sides of the mug along with the bottom border, the sections needed to overlap at least a little. I added bits of clay to look like where the waves would begin to swell, from the border over the sun area and into the side wave. I decided that the bottom wave section would have carved detail, but not as much detail as the actual waves, so I drew in long, gently sweeping lines. As the clay is very soft, if I wasn't happy with the lines, I could still wipe back over them to erase them and change directions, making them flow up or down or around. I then used my paddle carving tool to begin carving into those drawn lines. I angled the tool so I was creating beveled edges. I used a dampened thumb to burnish those harsh lines so they united with each other to transform into water currents. The beveling helps create the illusion of space and layers. Another tip is to flatten out the tool and run the sharp edge right along the border to define the outer layer from the rest of the layers, making sure to continue with the flattening and the burnishing. So here's what we have so far. For those dynamic waves, remember that the clay is still very soft, so I began carving in patterns of lines along what I could see as layers to try and figure out what areas I wanted to push forward and back, still making design choices as I go. In the end, I'll probably soften these lines so close to the border to give your eye a resting place from the detailed front layers. Another way to make one layer stand out from another is to push clay down under the top wave. I'm doing that with the flat part of the paddle tool. I wanted this wave to have several layers of breaks with each layer appearing to overlap the other, but now to me they look too separate and not like one big wave. So I decided that part of the wave might be falling down over itself, so again I used my finger to pull that top border over the bottom section. That really made the layers unify into one wave, just like I wanted. Don't be afraid to play around with your lines at this point. The clay is still soft and can be altered to exactly how you envision it. Here's a mug that I started earlier. You can see that I got the design how I wanted it at the soft leather hard stage and covered it with plastic to let it dry slowly. Now at the stiffer leather hard stage, I can really carve in more detail and clean up my edges. I wipe over the clay with a damp sponge, then go in with my paddle and sharpen up the lines. I also like the loop carver to get nice tapered lines for even more sharper details. I spend a lot of time at this stage really getting the details worked out and burnishing any of my fingerprints or gouges so the piece looks nice and smooth. I weighed the mug to see how much weight the extra clay adds to it, and the mug was a little over a pound, which is what I started out with, so I'm happy with that. To finish it, I added little underglaze washes of color into the crevices of the relief. I glazed the borders with Amico Glacier Celadon glaze. I used my white liner glaze on the inside, the background, and the handle. I fired it to cone 5 with a 6-minute hold. Do you think I met the challenge? Let me know what you think in the comments below. Thanks to the newest members of our Little Street Pottery Research Facility team. If you'd like to join the team and earn a title, click on the Super Thanks button or the link to buy me a coffee. It also really helps us out if you hit that like button and subscribe to our channel. See you next time in the studio.